small, skillful, difficult, female, and less competition. These 5 words are the little-known secret to China's Olympic success. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Chew on It. I'm Mr. Chew. Is China a sports powerhouse? Many would say, isn't it obvious? Over the past 25 years, China has been among the top 3 in the medal standings at 6 Olympic Games, so it must be a sports powerhouse. But in reality, China is more of an Olympic medal collector than a true sports powerhouse. Why do I say this? Today, let's discuss 2 things: the state-sponsored sports system in China and its opportunistic Olympic strategies. Let's go back to 1988 when China only won 5 gold medals at the Seoul Olympics. After losing face, the Chinese leaders were furious, and officials from the National Sports Commission held an urgent meeting to find a solution. By 1995, they released a guiding report to boost China Olympic medal count, called the Olympic Glory Plan. These officials summarized the report in 5 words: small, skillful, difficult, female, and less competition. What does this mean? It refers to sports with the so-called small ball like table tennis and badminton, skill-based events, those that can be perfected through repetitive mechanical movements, difficult events with low public participation, women's events, and competitions with less rivalry. In simple terms, focus on events with less competition. For instance, winning a gold in trampoline is much easier compared to winning one in soccer, even though both count equally in the medal tally. Under this strategy, nearly 75% of China's Olympic gold medals since 1984 have come from just 6 sports: table tennis, diving, weightlifting, shooting, gymnastics, and badminton. Compared to men's events, most women's sports have developed globally more recently. For many amateur female athletes in various countries, competitive sports aren't as important to them as other things in life, so the competition is less fierce. Therefore, by focusing state resources on developing top female athletes, China has a high chance of winning gold medals. Since 1984, 2/3 of China's Olympic gold medals have been won by women. At the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, 70% of the Chinese Olympic team were women, leaving only 30% for men. The same is true for the Paris Olympics, where women make up 66.5% of the Chinese team. Honestly, the Olympic Glory Plan is very characteristic of China's approach to everything. It's similar to many development models in other fields: short-sighted, profit-driven, and opportunistic. Instead of focusing on genuinely improving public interest in sports, school selection mechanisms, youth training systems, corruption in sports commissions, and professional league design, the strategy was all about achieving quick results through shortcuts and superficial success. The problem is, the glory of Olympic medal tally can't hide the underlying weakness. Over the decades, as China's total Olympic gold medals have increased significantly, how much has the sport's penetration among the general public improved? How much has the proportion of people who are passionate about fitness and sports increased? Has the competitive level of sports from elementary to youth improved on the international stage? According to a report from Jihui Data, around 4 million people work in the sports industry in the US, which makes up 2.5% of the workforce. In China, however, it's only 0.4%, which is more than 6 times less. The 2022 China Fitness Industry Data Report shows that there are 75.13 million fitness enthusiasts in China, but the penetration rate is just 5.37%. In comparison, the US has 65.7 million fitness enthusiasts and a penetration rate of nearly 20%, which is 4 times higher than in China. Additionally, the average spending on sports equipment per person in China is $16.90, while in the US, It's $287, which is 17 times more. Remember, the per capita GDP in the US is only 6 times higher than in China. While China's Olympic medals and economy have both rapidly increased over the past few decades, the gap between China and the world in sports that genuinely attract global attention, sports that the Chinese people also love, like soccer and basketball, has only widened. Additionally, the increase in Olympic medals has not led to more widespread participation in various sports among the Chinese people. The current state of Chinese sports is similar to China's construction of ghost cities to boost GDP figures. The Chinese system only requires accountability to their bosses instead of to the people. Therefore, officials focus on achieving superficial success in the short term, as long as the numbers looks good and please the leaders. They don't need to worry about the mess left behind or the long-term negative consequences. Once they've been promoted or transferred, the remaining problems are no longer their concern. So the entire national strategy is very short-sighted. Just look at Japan's current achievements. When China first implemented the opportunistic Olympic glory plan, it seemed to leave Japan behind, at least in terms of the medal table. But in the sports that truly matter internationally, those that can be commercialized and involve mass participation, what are commonly referred to as the Big Three, soccer, basketball, and volleyball, Japan has achieved remarkable success after decades of investment in the elementary schools, middle schools, youth training, and professional leagues. In this Paris Olympics, Japan is the only country besides the US to have qualified for the Olympic finals in both men's and women's events in all three of the Big Three sports. This is why, despite China having 11 times the population of Japan, has 405 athletes on its Olympic team. Japan, with a population of only 125 million people, has a team of 410 athletes, more than China, and only behind the US, host nation France, Australia, and Germany. Japanese men's and women's soccer teams have now reached world-class status. The men's team defeated Germany and Spain in group stage of the World Cup 2 years ago, only losing to Croatia in a penalty shootout in the round of 16. As for the Chinese men's soccer team, well, it's better not to mention them to avoid Chinese fans from vomiting blood. On the other hand, the Chinese women's team was among the best in the world during the 80s and the 90s, but now they can't even be considered second tier. Last year's World Cup saw them concede 17 goals in just 3 games and fail to advance beyond the group stage. Why is that? Because back in the 80s and 90s, the world's top soccer nations didn't pay much attention to women's soccer. But in the 21st century, Europe started to take women's soccer seriously, and their already well-established youth training systems for men's soccer were replicated for women. That's why they advanced so quickly. The Chinese women's team back then benefited from the fact that other countries weren't playing seriously, similar to how China dominates in diving and table tennis today. Basketball is another sport that's declining. This year, the Chinese men's basketball team didn't even qualify for the Olympics. After the team failed at the 2019 World Cup and missed out on a direct Olympic qualification, Yao Ming, the head of the Basketball Association, said in an interview.
应该说睁眼看世界吧。16年之后到现在为止，世界的水平离我们应该是越来越大了。
In recent years, Yao Ming has often been seen with a frustrated expression while watching games from the sidelines. Sometimes I really feel sorry for him. Some might argue, why is it that when Westerners are good at a sport, it's called popular? Can't we Chinese just enjoy our own sports? But that's just fooling ourselves. Ask the average Chinese person whether they prefer playing basketball, soccer, and running, or diving, weightlifting, and gymnastics. How many people in China actually play shooting, fencing, or curling? Are there more NBA fans in China or fans of diving and weightlifting? If Chinese people didn't care about soccer, why would the entire nation be so angry when the national team loses?
对得起我们吗？退钱！我们前两天我买的票，对得起我吗？对得起我吗？退钱！
Chinese people do like basketball and soccer, and China has always wanted to develop these sports. But despite pouring in a lot of resources and having a population of 1.4 billion, why can't China get better at them? Japan and South Korea have shown us that it has nothing to do with ethnicity. The root of the problem, like many others in China, lies in the system. The Chinese Communist Party wants to control everything, even sports, with political involvement. When you have outsiders managing professionals, how could it possibly turn out well? The various basketball and soccer associations in China are deeply corrupt and rotten to the core.
中国的男篮为什么这几年会成绩不理想？是这10年来做错了什么或没做什么吗？
我们缺乏了和国际的交流的机会，缺乏了和国际交流的机会，而且国际上的现在的交流变得越来越频繁，而国际之间的竞争变得越来越激烈。
您还是迟疑了，你没有真的回答我。
Yao Ming, the chairman of the Basketball Association, hesitated for a long time but ultimately held back and didn't dare to speak out. Does he not know where the problem lies? Of course he does. But does he dare to say it? That's the saddest part about this country. A legendary NBA Hall of Famer who fearlessly battled against the likes of Shaquille O'Neal has to bow and scrape before some clueless, overweight communist official in the field he knows best, where he dedicated all his youth. I've just discussed China's strategy of winning Olympic gold medals. Now let's talk about China's selection process. China's sports system is largely inherited from the Soviet Union's state-run system. This system relies on the country selecting tens of thousands of children, sending them to over 2,000 government-run sports schools for full-time training. For example, if you're good at badminton, you'll spend all your time playing badminton. Of course, there's some basic education, but the focus is mainly on badminton. This means using the nation's resources to train athletes with a single skill. I've noticed that many Chinese people think athletes worldwide are supported by their governments like they are in China. But the reality is the opposite. Except for China, Russia, North Korea, and Cuba, athletes from other countries usually have regular jobs, and sports are just their hobby. The US government, for instance, has never spent a dime on its Olympic athletes. Some might bring up the US basketball dream team as a counter-argument, but that's an exception for highly commercialized sports like basketball, soccer, and volleyball, where professional leagues exist because of their large audiences. The money professional players earn comes from the commercial operations like ticket sales, TV rights, and sponsorships, with no government involvement. Also, very few Olympic sports allow professional athletes to participate. Only basketball, tennis, golf, and boxing. In soccer, only professional players under 23 years old are allowed, with each team permitted a maximum of 3 overage players. The events in which China is competitive in the Olympics are precisely those niche sports that are unlikely to have professional leagues. In most countries, athletes in these niche sports, unlike their Chinese counterparts, aren't supported by the government. If they don't have enough sponsors, they need to work regular jobs. China's approach of mobilizing the entire nation to train athlete specialists is understandably very efficient. Combined with China's strategy of focusing on less popular Olympic events, this allowed China to quickly become a powerhouse in winning Olympic medals. But what are the costs of this state-run system? Many Chinese athletes lead very narrow lives, lacking the opportunity to explore and learn other skills. They must leave their families at a young age to enter sports schools for specialized training. In this process, aside from the daily grind of training, they have little time to engage in other activities like socializing, gaining cultural knowledge, or experiencing emotions. Some don't even get to see their families more than a few times a year. These athletes grow up and spend their sports careers in a relatively closed environment, with little diversity or freedom, and their life goals are confined to athletic achievements. As a result, once their sports careers end, or if they don't even make the cut, they often struggle to adapt to a new life. They lack practical skills and abilities, and it's hard for them to find their place in society, except for perhaps becoming coaches. Some sports are more forgiving, allowing retired athletes to live off their former fame. But the niche Olympic sports that China focuses on, which barely get any attention outside of the Olympics, often leave athletes with bleak futures. For example, retired female weightlifters often face very difficult lives. For example, weightlifter Zhou Chunlan won 9 gold medals over 6 years. But after retiring, she was reduced to working in a public bathhouse, scrubbing people for a living. What is even more heartbreaking is that during her childhood training, her coach forced her to take drugs containing male hormones, which has caused her to grow a beard and rendered her infertile for life. In an interview, Zhou Chunlan said that she often looks at those glittering medals, and before she knows it, tears start to fall. Once, she was so glorious, but now she can only use her strength to scrubbing people's back. And what was all this for? China's Olympic medal count. But are these medals, won through a state-run system, really something to be proud of? Do they truly make people think China is impressive? I don't think so. When you use the power of an entire country to train athletes and then compete against amateurs, winning is only natural. I believe the state-run sports system fundamentally goes against the true spirit of the Olympics. The purpose of sports competition should be to foster a love of sports and integrate them into people's lives. The Olympics should teach perseverance and an unyielding spirit. So, these competitions should genuinely be about grassroots participation, with the strongest emerging from schools and communities to compete. That's why you'll see that in other countries, if they are strong in a particular Olympic sport, it's because that sport has a strong grassroots foundation at home. For example, in Brazil, the streets are full of kids playing soccer. In the US, you can find many skilled players at any random street basketball court, and their college players can compete with most national teams around the world. Similarly, Malaysia and Indonesia are badminton powerhouses, so badminton is very popular among the people. There are countless local coaches, and a high percentage of the population plays badminton at a high level. But when you look at China, another badminton powerhouse, the grassroots level doesn't reflect the country's dominance in the sport. Back when China was already dominating the world in badminton 2 decades ago, I was surprised to find during my university days in the US that many Chinese students, despite loving the sport, were not very good at it. I was just a small town school representative in Malaysia and couldn't even make the county team. But at an American university, very few Chinese students could beat me. However, among our badminton club members, there were many top players from Malaysia, Indonesia, and even countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Taiwan, which are known for being strong in international badminton. the proportion of skilled Chinese players was surprisingly low. This is because outside of those selected for state-run training, there isn't much grassroots development in China. I had a Malaysian friend who was a county-level table tennis player, and he told me that while working at a factory in Wuhan with thousands of employees, he found very few who could beat him. Malaysia's table tennis is among the weakest in the world, and he was shocked. Imagine going to a factory in the US with thousands of workers to challenge them to street basketball. How badly would you get beaten? Let's not even talk about sports like badminton and table tennis, which are already very popular. What about China's Olympic strong points like archery, shooting, curling, and canoeing? Have you ever seen anyone playing these sports in China? During the 15 years I lived in Shanghai, I watched 4 Olympics. Sometimes I thought these sports seemed interesting and wanted to try them. But even in Shanghai, besides a few archery ranges, you could hardly find any places to play. It's even worse in second and third tier cities. As for public soccer and basketball courts, they exist, but these facilities are often poor and frequently taken over by people doing square dancing.
大妈去了之后，把那小伙子赶走，小伙子不走，最后看不妥，挑衅战场。小伙子在哪打球，他就在哪跳。
大妈们为了跳广场舞手撕篮球场，在球框上安装铁丝网，更有甚者直接开铲车将球框捣毁，只为了自己跳广场舞时不被打扰。看着球场被广场舞大妈们霸占，无奈的孩子们只能对着门框投篮，本不充足的篮球场变成了跳广场舞的场地。在学校里跳着无用的篮球操，一项体育运动演变成了表演节目。强如字母哥这样的球员来到中国，也逃不过篮球操的洗礼。这一场面直接将字母哥惊呆了，估计怎么也想不通姚明当年是怎么打出来的。
This is exactly because China focuses on a state-run system for elite training, and not much resources are invested in public sports facilities. Therefore, China is merely a powerhouse in collecting Olympic medals, not a true sports powerhouse. A true sports powerhouse is not just reflected in the number of medals, but is more evident in widespread public participation, a rich sports culture, diversified sports development, well-established youth sports competitions, and widely accessible sports facilities across the country. Finally, the last point, which is actually the aspect I dislike the most about the state-sponsored system, is that it is a system where the success of one comes at the cost of many others. The glamorous, successful world and Olympic champions we see are just a tiny fraction of those who have succeeded. The vast majority of people who have trained for over a decade in this system never even get the chance to compete. In other countries, while top athletes also undergo rigorous training, their lives have other dimensions. They have jobs, other interests, and hobbies. Even if they are not ultimately selected to compete in the Olympics, although they may feel some regret, it has little impact on their lives, and they continue to love the sport. But those who are eliminated in the state-sponsored system, having had their life's direction determined from a very young age, often have no other skills or knowledge besides the specific sports skill they have trained for throughout their childhood and teenage years. After falling in the harsh selection process, they are left with no other skills, no social experience, low educational levels, and often with sports injuries. What are they supposed to do next? Behind every Liu Shang and Pan Zhanle, there are countless unknown individuals who have trained for half their lives, yet remain forever unnoticed. Just like Zhou Chunlan, what kind of life awaits them after their sports careers end? In reality, they are all sacrifices made under the banner of national glory. Thank you for watching Chew On It. Hit like and subscribe if you would like to know more about what's going on in China. I'm Mr. Chew. See you next time.